2, 1.
Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Select Board for the time being, and welcome to the joint meeting of the Select Board and the Advisory Committee to hear from the Town Administrator on the town and school override proposals for the May town election. Also on that ballot will be the Pierce debt override or debt exclusion. The debt exclusion for the Pierce School rebuilding, which we will discuss at a later date. We're meeting on Tuesday, February 14, 2023, also known as Valentine's Day, so please behave accordingly. First, are there any announcements from members of the Select Board?
Bernard.
Yes, Miriam.
Thank you. I just want to let everybody know we have closed applications for the second round of the ARPA funding. We will be having our first meeting, reconvening the ARPA Review Committee this Friday at 2 o'clock. Like before, all the meetings will be public. We had a total of 56 applications, totaling an ask of over $36 million. I will just take this opportunity to remind everybody we have about $9 million to spend. So we will be cutting down that list quite considerably with that first cut happening Friday. So I invite you to join us and listen in. And if you head to the website, you'll see all our meeting times listed, and we already have the date up for when we will have a meeting solely for public input once we have a more trimmed down, reasonable list of grants that we are considering. This is ARPA that we're talking about.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you.
Did I see John with his hand up?
I don't have my hand up, no.
Oh, okay, your face just popped up on my screen. Any other updates or announcements from the Select Board?
I'll just say that Linda Pelkey has a question about ARPA. It's up to you
Okay.
whether you want to entertain it now or have her join us on Friday.
Okay, Linda, why don't you quickly ask a question for Miriam?
Thank you, Bernard. Yeah, Linda Olson-Pelkey, Advisory Committee. My question is this amount, the 9 million that you mentioned, does it include the county funds that are also available to us?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, good. Any other comments or updates from the Select Board? Okay, let's go on to public comment. John, will you read the rules for public comment?
Thank you, Bernard, I will. And thank you to the public for joining us for public comment. It's an opportunity for us to hear your perspective on the issues in Brookline that matter to you. We do have a few rules. Each person speaking tonight limited to 3 minutes. You don't need to use the entire time. You may if you like. Please refrain from personal attacks and from addressing personnel issues during your comments. Members of the public sometimes raise questions. We may be able to provide a quick answer, but are more likely to work with staff to get a more thorough answer and respond over email. We'll let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining and when your time is up. And please conclude your remarks at that time. If you have more to say, you're welcome to send an email to board members expressing your thoughts in greater detail. Devin, who do we have on our list?
At this time, there are 27 attendees. Deborah Brown had reached out in advance of the meeting to sign up for public comment, but I do not see her here with us now. If folks are interested in making a public comment, they can use the hand raise feature or Q&A.
Okay, so let's move on to the main event of this joint Select Board and Advisory Committee meeting. Town School Override Presentation. This is the initial presentation and discussion of the override. We will have public hearings on the ballot questions, including the override, the cannabis question, and the Pierce debt exclusion on March 14. And then on March 21st, we will finalize the ballot questions and vote to place them on the May ballot. So I'd like to call on the town administrator, Chaz Carey, to give his presentation on the town and school override.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And thank you to all of you for being here tonight on Valentine's Day for this presentation. It is very important for us to talk through the initial recommendation of staff regarding the town's needs in operational budget over a 3-year period. I want to begin by thanking the Select Board for its leadership on this. Since I've been here in September, they've really taken the initiative in holding a budget summit even before I officially came into the role in September, and then following up with that in December to talk through the broad priorities and overall agenda that they have in terms of what the town, their vision for the town and their priorities for the town. And I think this work that staff has done over this last several months reflects those priorities, builds on them, and utilizes a variety of sources of funds to achieve the aims of the community as has been expressed. So I thank the Select Board for this opportunity and for their guidance, which has led to this presentation. We face a significant challenge in town currently. Our revenues just simply do not match our expenditures. And that was true before the pandemic. You may recall that there was an override in 2018. That was the most recent override. It was primarily for school-related matters, but there was a small town component to that override as well. But the pandemic has certainly exacerbated that. Revenue sources have changed. And while the one-time federal funds provided by sources such as the CARES Act and ARPA have been extremely welcome and have been put to good use by the town, and in ARPA's case of the broader community, they are one-time funds. And they are not long-term solutions to the operating problems that we face. The restoration of services and the deferred maintenance costs, the increasing deferred maintenance costs, are competing with rising fixed costs, inflation, and collective bargaining pressures. We have limited new growth on the horizon. As many of you here know, from the advisory committee on the Select Board, the primary driver of growth in Brookline is property tax. And property taxes are limited by Proposition 2.5 to an annual 2.5% levy increase plus the formula for any potential new growth. While there is an increasing demand for municipal services, the horizon for new growth looks relatively stagnant. And so the hope here in developing this operating override and the principles for which the Select Board tasked staff in analyzing this is to focus on broad-based solutions to these problems, to create an override model that looks for positive returns on investment and reduction of overall costs, spending money to save money, and diversify our tax base and our options going forward. So we began this override process in discussions with community members and the Select Board in September when I first came on board. There was an override working group, an informal override working group made up of citizens, including members of the Select Board and the advisory committee, that provided staff on both the town and school side with regular guidance and feedback. It was an invaluable exercise. I'm extremely grateful to those members of the community who provided us with that guidance. And I just want to name them briefly. Cliff Brown, Carla Benka, Neil Wyshynski, Andy Liu, Susan Ditkoff, Mike Sandman, Mariah Nobrega, and the staff team all throughout, including on the school side, the superintendent, and Ruth Quinn Burdell on the town side, Melissa Goff, obviously, and our new ATA for Finance, Charles Young, as well as our new treasurer and finance director, Lincoln Heineman. So thank you to everyone who participated in that. And for those of you who were involved, we greatly appreciate your input, your guidance, your history that you've provided in terms of past town and school overrides, and your depth of community experience in terms of identifying what it is that the community is seeking in any potential override. In December, we had meetings with department heads to identify needs, both new needs and existing needs. Obviously, in a no override environment, we are still looking at a structural deficit. So those conversations have been difficult. We are looking at, when the budget book comes out, when the initial fiscal forecast comes out in what's projected to be early March, you will see a no override budget in there. And that will reflect the cuts that will need to be made in the event that an override is not authorized by the voters. But we have tried as best we can to spread those cuts around by identifying, true
What?
priorities on the
Yeah.
department heads front. As previously mentioned, these select board summits have really been valuable. I particularly thank both the select board and members of the community who came out and participated in and provided feedback after the December initial presentation of priorities. That really informed how we are moving forward on this. And obviously, there was the effort of identifying non-property tax sources of funding to defray these costs. Overall, when you look at both the one-time and the one-time and recurring costs that the town is looking to cover, the base total of that is over $11 million. And that's before taking into account additional optional ballot questions, which we will discuss at the end of this presentation. Of those, just under 6 million of those are recurring costs. And of those $6 million, we have identified alternative sources of funding for over $1 million of it. So we are looking at an estimated tax impact from an override and I say again, a base override as follows. Over a 3-year period, the tax levy would increase up to, for the town side, $4.995 million. On the school side, and I will let the school team speak to this in greater detail after we're done on the town side, that cumulative number is $6.998 million for a total override number of $11.98 million. That is an estimated additional increase in the tax levy from the FY 2023 tax rate of 4.3%. The town will publish a calculator that will allow residents to estimate their total tax increase as a result of the proposed override using their property value. So, this is obviously, it's a significant increase, but it is also, I think you will see in these presentations, targeted towards the community's needs. So this information obviously is part of the public packet that will be posted on the town's website and available to you. I also have a larger spreadsheet that includes one-time expenses, including what's being asked for from ARPA funds from the ARPA committee. That document, I think, is kind of what I refer to as the town's master financial spreadsheet going forward in this override season. So I will be happy to that again will also be in the packet and shared around. I will make sure the public has access to that because I think it's important to understand just how much we've tried to diversify the sources of funding from which we've been drawing on this. So what are the aims here? What can almost $5 million do on the town side? Additional $5 million do. We will maintain the services we already provide by eliminating our current structural operating deficit. It will restore critical services that were cut during the pandemic. It will make our roads safe and resilient for all users while freeing up resources for comprehensive complete streets planning. It will invest in increased planning capacity so we can grow sustainably as a community, strengthen our commercial property tax base, and rely less on overrides in the future. It will fund long-term solutions for our waste disposal and pest control problems. It will help us take concrete steps towards our fossil fuel-free future. It will preserve our critical natural resources, especially our unique tree canopy. It will provide expanded services to potentially vulnerable populations, including seniors and people who do not speak English as a first language at home. It will reorganize key municipal departments to make them more efficient. And it will pay competitive wages to our town employees so we can attract and retain talent that will provide the best services possible to this community. I want to go into detail about some of these buckets of items so that you can see specifically what it is that we're talking about. We'll begin with the budget restoration. Right now, the town is looking at an operating deficit of around $800,000 to $825,000. Now, as you can see here, we do not have, and this is the piece of this puzzle, is what aid we're getting from the state this year. Because there's a new governor, the budget is delayed. And, we have some indicators. For example, we have an indicator of some of our potential costs for healthcare. We have indicators of what the consensus revenue projection is, which is unfortunately not as good as as it has been in past years. In fact, the state missed its tax revenue projection for this past quarter for the first time in some time. So unfortunately, that indicator is not good. But we are hopeful that with a new governor and the pressure from many of our localities, not just us, about the need to increase state aid, that hopefully there will be a reorienting of priorities to provide us with state aid, and this number will go down. But we don't know yet. And it is unfortunately possible that it might go up, but we are aiming to ensure that that does not happen. On the town side, in a no override scenario, we will be looking at eliminating several vacant positions. Now, unfortunately, those positions could include things like patrol officers in the police department. We would, on my office's side, I have long talked about the desire to bring on a full-time communications position. I've identified potential sources of funding for that and a potential line for that. That full-time communications position would then be coordinating with the Office of Diversity and Community Inclusion, Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. But in the event of no override, we would have to cut that position. The loss of consulting services would impact the planning department severely and would likely delay the comprehensive plan. There would be a reduction of part-time staff and hours at libraries, and significant reduction in the capacity of the recreation department and building departments. Those are the current areas in which we are looking at the most significant cuts. Though I stress again, those could change depending on conversations with, both with the select board and with the departments. That could also change if state revenue numbers are better than state aid numbers are better than what we intend to be. So we are hopeful for that, and we are hopeful that we will be able to potentially reduce this number accordingly. Moving on to new items or items that are restored to the budget, restored to the budget. The single largest line item in the override is for streetscape transformation. It is an increase of $2.1 million in the transportation budget. Because per the 2022 Transportation Mobility Plan, $5 million a year in roadway maintenance is required in order to maintain the overall condition of the roadway network in its current condition. Our current annual funding level on a year-in-year-out basis is $2.8 million. So between the $2.1 million and an additional $100,000 that we hope to realize through a parking fee increase from $1.25 an hour to $1.50 an hour, we believe that bringing that up to that maintenance level will then free up the other sources of funding that we used to get towards one-time sources of funding, like through the capital improvement plan, the CIP, and other sources that were originally used, towards those maintenance level projects, just keeping us afloat in some way. Those can be put towards transformative uses. As you can see, if you read the Transportation Mobility Plan, I encourage you to do so. Towards the end, there is a list of priority roadways that should be developed according to a complete streets model, making them more accessible for all users, not just cars. And that's the aim here. The aim is to have the money on hand to not have to worry about the degradation of our roadway system, so that we can focus on the aspirational projects going forward. DPW fleet replacement. There is a massive backlog that has been exacerbated by the pandemic at DPW for its fleet of large-scale vehicles. If we are to provide an additional $325,000 to DPW for fleet replacement, that would allow them to purchase one large-scale vehicle, like a snow removal vehicle, each year. Some of DPW's vehicles, were due to come off the streets in the 90s, and they're now just non-functional. And so being able to catch up on that backlog is incredibly important. Now, to the extent possible, DPW vehicle replacements we are intending to move to hybrid and electric models, but in the immediate term, given the critical need, it is important for us to make clear to the community that We're using ARPA one-time funds to purchase a significant electric fleet upgrade. We're talking about 15 vehicles, large and small, including at DPW, 5 smaller vehicles and 1 all-electric Packer, which everyone is very excited about. But in the early years of this process, we are still unfortunately looking at gas-driven vehicles just to replace the current extreme need at the DPW fleet level. So we are moving towards fossil fuel free. But for some of these larger vehicles, until we complete the town charging plan and start implementing it, as a practical matter, it's hard for us to move beyond where we are coming from with the ARPA dollars. But I will say that ARPA investment in 15 electric vehicles is extremely significant for the community. For town facilities maintenance, we rerouted a significant portion of the money that we would have spent on deferred maintenance and maintaining town facilities for COVID compliance reasons. Restoring this money, this $200,000 into the deferred maintenance budget will lessen the chances of costly system-wide failures. It will allow us to maintain town buildings, which are seeing increased use and will likely see significantly increased use once the hybrid meeting emergency authorization expires next month. This will help us keep overall costs down, investing preventatively now to avoid additional costs of replacement rather than repair later. I think everyone has seen some version of this. This comes from the Transportation Master Plan study. Spending $1 on preservation when things are okay but deteriorating will eliminate or delay spending $6 to $10 on rehabilitation or reconstruction. That's where we want to get to with this additional funding on this front. For municipal resiliency, we are looking at $500,000 in employee recruitment and retention. And what we are focused on is a study that Charlie Young and the HR department and Braga have been conducting using data provided by the Collins Center, but also from other communities regarding our salaries for mid-managers and technical professional staff. Obviously, union-related staff, that's covered under collective bargaining. We continue to bargain collectively with all of our unions on that front. But for non-union staff, in particular, the unprecedented turnover that we've seen in government services, the tight labor market we're experiencing, requires us to look at increasing our wages to provide the level of service the community expects. As you can see, for mid-managers in certain departments like buildings, finance, HR, and recreation, individuals are 2 to 16% below market. For technical and professionals, particularly folks like social workers, we're at 5 to 20% below market. That needs to change, if we were to retain and attract new talent. So this amount will allow us to better recruit and maintain, and in highly competitive positions, it will allow us to achieve not just parity with other communities, but potentially outbid them. That is in very limited circumstances. We are not trying to be market setters, but what we are trying to do is ensure that for the priorities the community has, we are being responsive to them and we are hiring the right people at the right price to provide the services that the community wants. For the buildings department, we have had several major retirements at the senior levels over the past several years, and that's led to an unfortunate departure of institutional knowledge. But we're very grateful for those individuals, some of whom have stayed on a temporary capacity to provide their knowledge and assistance to us. Their years of experience have really been invaluable, and we're very grateful to them for, even at the point of retirement, being willing to provide some level of guidance to us going forward. But this provides us an opportunity to restructure the department using a model based on Wellesley's building department that will ensure future redundancy and responsibility, so that we will not be in a situation where the retirement of one person who had, significant responsibilities accumulated over 20 to 30 years results in a vacuum of knowledge. Instead, there will be critical redundancy in that department, in both the public buildings and the inspectional services units, so that no one employee is indispensable, but also the ladder of growth is very clear. And there's the possibility for promotion and the ability to think laterally throughout that department. That reorganization is ongoing in conversation with the buildings department team, with our Commissioner Dan Bennett and our Director of Public Buildings, Charlie Simmons, and the HR department. Right now, that is our preliminary budget. We expect that number to change slightly. If anything, I think it will hopefully potentially go down slightly, but I can't guarantee that. But that $235,000 is the initial figure. Finally, HCA stands for Host Community Agreement. So many of you know the marijuana retailers in town signed host community agreements with the town when they came into the market. And initially, those host community agreements allowed for the town to take up to 3% of certain profits for their to offset the as mitigation funds, right? To offset the cost, the increase for having marijuana businesses operate in town. Because unfortunately of the abuse of those agreements in other communities, the legislature revised that law significantly. And now the rule is much more akin to a licensing arrangement, which is that any fee charged under an HCA must be reasonably related to actual costs incurred. I am grateful, however, that as of early this week, we have a tentative, a very tentative agreement, potentially, with the marijuana retailers in the community, for which we are grateful for their engagement, to revisit what a licensing fee looks like for a marijuana retail establishment. That is significantly less than the 3% they used to pay under the HCAs, but it will allow us to pay down a significant amount of the 2.5 full-time equivalent salaries that we have identified as necessary for the operation, the ongoing operation of marijuana retail in town. That does leave a small gap, which we hope to fund beginning in the third year of the override to the tune of $35,000. But the rest of that 2.5 FTEs will be funded through the licensing fees for marijuana retail. Enhanced municipal services. You can see in the broader document regarding one-time and fixed costs that $500,000 in one-time and recurring amounts has been fixed for the Rodent Control Action Plan. There is additional recurring, the solid waste fee increase is covering one position under the Rodent Control Action Plan. This amount in the override is for a full-time code enforcement specialist, as well as the renewal and potential expansion of the pest control contract we currently have and the food safety consulting contract we currently have. In the event that those contracts are reduced or eliminated due to their success, those monies will go towards the capital outlays for additional dumpsters and trash receptacles going forward. Those are currently parked in the CIP. If we are able to pay for those out of this additional funding, we will. So those are the three items that are being funded for the Rodent Control Action Plan through the override. For urban forestry management, we currently have contracted services for this, and the cost of that is just continuing to rise. As you can see, 2004, we had a contract for $125,000 that could pay for more than a year of service. By 2020, that covered 14.2 weeks, and it's even lower now. So using this money in addition to with an additional $100,000 to be added from the parking fee increase to hire 3 full-time employees to conduct this kind of work, a tree warden, an urban forest manager, and a tree climber bucket truck operator will allow us to maintain our urban canopy and provide the sort of services we need in the community, the sort of tree services we desperately need in the community now, given the overall health of our tree canopy. Finally, in terms of enhanced municipal services, increased planning capacity. We're looking for an additional $223,000 for the planning department. This will allow the planning department to undertake 2 additional studies per year, one large and one small. And when we think of large, we think about things like the comprehensive plan, right? The estimated cost to undertake year 1 of the comprehensive plan is about $150,000. The estimated cost to undertake a smaller project, such as Babcock Street housing modeling and housing financial modeling, concept planning, that's around $50,000. So, this will allow increased flexibility in the planning department. This was a key recommendation of the Moderators Committee, the BFAC Committee, the Brookline Fiscal Advisory, the Brookline Financial Advisory Committee, that we that we have taken on here. We believe that increasing planning capacity will allow for the diversification of the tax base, will allow for sustainable growth in a way that supports commercial development in a healthy way, and diversifies the tax base so that we need to rely less on operating overrides. Finally, serving vulnerable populations. $100,000 towards the Senior Center and Council on Aging's age-friendly services and programs. This will allow us to bring on a full-time geriatric social worker from a part-time position. It will also allow for expansion of their transportation plans. In addition to using some of that ARPA, the ARPA investment, I know the Council on Aging is very interested in microtransit of the kind that Newton is now piloting, in allowing increased mobility for seniors to get in and around town. So we're very excited to be able to potentially finance that going forward. Language access is crucial, and we need to hire a language access coordinator. We are coming to the end of our language access study that will lay out key recommendations for how to proceed from here. And we are grateful for the consultants for their work on that and for ODICR's work in managing that process. But in order for us to then follow through on that, we need a full-time employee dedicated to that, and they need to have a budget. So that $100,000 finances both the employee and their budget. Continuing two three large-scale ARPA programs. The Farmers Market Coupon Program, which has been very popular, that allows access for folks, for vulnerable populations to the farmers market, costs approximately $50,000 a year. The Community Gatekeepers Program is new. We talked about this at the select board meeting earlier. It is a program designed to pay a small stipend to members of vulnerable populations to serve as interlocutors with the community, to connect as trusted interlocutors with their communities, to connect them to services that are available. A little bit of outlay, again, goes a long way in ensuring that people have access to preventative services before they need them for more desperate situations. And hearing that from a trusted community member rather than from the top down or from a department that might not even speak their language is really crucial. Given the relatively low dollar amount for that program and the potential upside, we think it's important to continue. Similarly, the new Welcome to Brookline program proposed by CDICR that ODICR is developing will be an excellent multilingual way to ensure that vulnerable members of the community are aware of and connected to the services that they need. This is especially important in the green phase of things. Too often, I think when we talk about how to electrify structures, how to ensure that people are fossil fuel free, we're thinking about people of means, people who have the ability to be connected to and navigate complex environments on their own. People who may own a structure, may have inherited a structure, but who don't have the income to even know where to begin on this, need the assistance of knowing where these resources are and to be connected to them in the language that they speak and in a way that they understand, so that they are not left behind by this coming green initiative. And so I think that's a crucial part of this Welcome to Brookline program. Finally, we have discussed the possibility of adding standalone ballot questions. These would not be part of that base $11 million override. They would be two separate questions on the ballot. And we would welcome your guidance and suggestions from the Select Board and the Advisory Committee on whether and how to include these. The first is the low to moderate income recreation scholarships. As you know, the Warrant Article 26 Committee published a comprehensive report on this late last year, estimating that the total yearly cost is approximately $1.3 million, for a sliding scale of up to 100% fee forgiveness for the lowest income residents for recreation programming. We believe approximately $300,000 of that could be financed by revolving funds and donations. That would leave an additional $1 million for the operating fund to pick up. The other thing that we've heard is of substantial community interest is a composting program. It would be, if approved, it would be rolled out over a period of 3 years, starting with 5,000 homes in year 1, 10,000 homes in year 2, and then all homes in year 3. We could potentially institute fees competitive with private compost providers. Our rough estimate is that could reduce the cost of the program by around $400,000, but it would reduce uptake. Other communities do not currently charge additional composting fees if they provide composting services. We're somewhat unique in that regard. So I think it's a discussion that we need to have as a community as to if this is something that we want to put on the ballot, whether or not we want fees included in that. So I've talked for enough time, and I want to give some time for questions and to make sure that the schools are able to present as well. The next steps on this, the governor's budget numbers are expected March 1st. Under our bylaws, we have 7 days after the governor's budget comes out for us to put out our financial plan. So calculating from that, it would be the 7th. Concurrently with this process, given the truncated schedule, there will be departmental budget hearings. I know both the advisory committee and the select board are in the process of scheduling those. I intend to conduct community outreach for informational sessions only. In particular, I'm interested in speaking with the League of Women Voters, although again, I welcome any sort of informational sessions that you or others may direct me to. And as the chair said, the hearing on these questions will be on the 14th of March. And the board will vote on the final language on the 21st. Thank you for paying attention during this lengthy presentation. I would welcome your questions.
Okay, let's start. So Chaz, when are the schools going to make the presentation? How are we doing that?
I leave it to you. If you would like the schools to present now, and then we can have questions at the end, we can absolutely do that. If that's your preference.
What do other members of the board and advisory committee think? I mean, I think it'd be useful to hear their presentation so that we have a total picture, but that's just my opinion.
I agree, Bernard.
Okay. Anyone disagree?
I'm neutral, so there you go.
Neutral?
Call me
Okay.
Switzerland.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to, sort of details of the school side of this. Of course, select board has been into the town side for a while, and we haven't heard from the school committee. So,
Bernard, this
Yeah.
is Alok. Can the advisory committee respond to your question?
oh, sure. I'm sorry.
No worries. I was just curious. There are some questions that have come up that are, I think, related directly to what Chaz has presented. I'm wondering, I'm happy to hold them for later, but from continuity perspective, would it be better to ask them now and then move on?
Why don't you try to hold them unless there's something that really can't be held?
No, it's fine. I can hold it till the end.
I mean, my expectation is that your questions may even be a little different after hearing from the school committee. So Chaz, who do we have from the schools?
I'd like to welcome the superintendent of schools, Dr. Guillory.
Good evening, everyone. So great to be here with you this evening.
Good evening, Dr. Guillory.
Is everyone able to see the screen?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. So thank you, Chaz, for setting up. And again, I want to echo the same thank yous that you've already acknowledged. So certainly to the town team, as well as you, Mr. Administrator, for your support and guidance as we prepared for this override. Certainly want to acknowledge and thank the school team for their hard work in pulling information together, and certainly to the school committee for their thoughtful feedback as we continue to engage in this process. So first up, this is will encapsulate the FY24 preliminary budget request that I presented to the school committee, as well as an override request. So we on the school side are guided by our budget guidelines as we work to build our budget each year. The school committee is now in the habit or in the frame of mind of voting 5-year budget guidelines. And so each year we reassess those to make sure that these are pertinent and relevant to the work that we're doing. We want to ensure equitable access to curriculum and services for all students. We want to build a budget that is optimized for efficiency and sustainability. We want to ensure that we're engaging in the continuous improvement process of academic program, including curriculum implementation, program support, and program review. And I'll make sure to highlight program review because that's not, there have been some programs that we've had in our organization for quite some time that haven't been reviewed. And we are in the process of queuing those up as well as taking some of them on. Continue to provide enhanced support for the social emotional needs of our students and improve the experience of a PSB employee, including employee growth through professional development and leadership opportunities. This is a budget process timeline that we've developed on the school side, and it's important to note, as you all do, that there are multiple aspects on the school side as well as on the non-school side, as Chaz alluded to in his closing remarks. And so, just to give a brief orientation, the line here, everything above the line sits on the school side. Everything below the line is non-schools but has interface. And so just for context, we received our initial budget allocation from the town in December of $127.3 million. In January, I submitted a request for $131.8 million. In February, we received an updated number from the town side of $127 million. And the school committee took a preliminary vote on this number with some guidance and getting this number more efficient and refined as we continue going through our process. And here we are now at a joint session or presentation to select board and advisory. We'll continue tracking down the line of our work on both sides of the line, but this just gives some orientation to that work. When we look at who we are as the public schools of Brookline, we often talk about numbers and numbers in a pure sense. I think it's very important for us to keep in mind that we are talking about children and educating children with complex needs. Each student comes to us and pre-equipped preloaded with various pieces of information and experiences, and we take all of those experiences into our classrooms, and we push, we stretch, and we demand excellence of those students. And so with that, I think it's important for us to dig a little deeper into what the numbers mean. So when we look at our PSB enrollment by group, we have our earliest learners, BEEP, and these again are snapshot numbers in time. When we look at our BEEP enrollment for October 1st, we had 257 students enrolled in BEEP. In our K-8 schools, we were at 4,716 students. At our high school, we were at 2,087 students. And students in our out-of-district placements that don't often get accounted for in our numbers, we have 74 students that are being serviced outside of the public schools of Brookline, but those are also our students. So it brings our total district enrollment up to 7,134, but you'll see a different number later on that reflects our in-district students. When we look at sort of the profile of our students, so who's making up, what makes up a large portion of our population, the orange line represents PSB students, and the blue line represents state numbers, statewide. So first language, not English, nearly 31% of our population fits that category. 11.3% of our population is classified as an English language learner. 13.8 or nearly 14% of our students are identified as low income. 18% of our students are identified as students with disabilities. And nearly 40% of our students are identified as high needs, which also takes into account these previous categories that are discussed. And so I think it's important for us to also realize that the nature of education has changed dramatically over the past 15, 20 years. And so oftentimes I hear people say, well, when I was in school, things were like this. And that was true for that point in time. But as we have evolved as a society, gotten more competitive, Many more resources are needed to educate our students now. Again, they're coming preloaded with quite a bit of experiences that many of us did not necessarily have as children, but also coming with additional complexities. And I think that's an important part of who makes up the Public Schools of Brookline student body. When we look at our enrollment trends, we're certainly appreciative that our enrollment is on an upward swing or an upward trend. As of February 7th, 300 students have completed the registration process in anticipation of entering kindergarten in September. Last year at this time, we were at an enrollment, a registration at 215 students. Mobility and churn remain an important part of our data, and it's also important to know that we made staffing adjustments last year to bring staffing commensurate with pre-pandemic levels. And so the chart on the side just takes us back in time. October 2019, for that snapshot, we were at an enrollment of 7,777 students. In October 20, so first year of pandemic year, the enrollment was 6,891 students. My first year in the district, we were at 6,928 students. And that January of my first year, our enrollment had climbed to 7,000 students. Now, if we fast forward a year from October of 21 to October of 22, our snapshot data was at 7,060 students. As of January, we were at 7,072 students. And in February, we are at 7,092 students. Now, these numbers do not include the out-of-district students that I referenced earlier. So these are our in-district student numbers. Staffing trends over time, when we think about the pre-pandemic year, our FTE count was 1378 in 2021. The 2021 school year, it was 1348. In the 21-22 school year, 1299. And in the 22-23 school year, this is a projected number. We're still going through the verification process with DESE, but we are anticipating that our number should be very close to this number, if not less. When we're looking at our all funds budget, our year-on-year growth, I think the key takeaway to look across the system, if you look certainly at FY21 and FY22, Chaz talked about level funding and our revenues, our expenses outpacing our revenues or our appropriations. So when we look back at FY21 and 22, you can see very much so that PSP's budget from the operating side was essentially level funded. When we look at where we are presently at FY23, our all-in budget is looking at 148.3 million. And when we look at the projected budget, the 131.8 that I requested, our total all-in budget is coming in at around 150 million. And so when we look at our overall budget in totality, that we're growing at just about a little north of 1% compared to FY23. Now, the real shift comes in terms of the funding sources. So going into FY24, we're losing many of our one-time funds, the ARPA and the ESSER funds for that 5.6 million. And this contributes to the shift essentially from the purple funds here to the orange funds here. And that, and again, accounts for that large budgetary shift in funding sources. So if we look at our FY23 operating budget at 125.6 million, the loss of ESSER and ARPA funds at 5.6 million, contractual obligations and inflationary pressures at 2.2 million, we anticipate turnover savings of about 600,000, and we're using a one-year stopgap for our BEAP revolver to offset cost as well. which now brings my initial budget request to 131.8 million. So I think this is important to encapsulate the vast majority of school budgets are personnel. So 87.4% of that 131.8 million that's been requested is sitting in personnel. And when we look at our operating budget by staff classification, our district leadership, there are 29 FTE that are sitting there. School leadership, 19%, 40 FTE are sitting in as vice principals and curriculum coordinators. Our secretarial staff at 37.5, our teaching staff at 829, our paraprofessionals at 247, and our custodial staff at 44. And again, this is on the operating budget. There are other staff that do sit on the revolvers that are not reflected in here, but it's important to note that 96% of the staff reflected here are unionized. And I think that speaks or connects to what Chaz was talking about in terms of maintaining competitive workforce wages. So our 131.8 million request reflects what we're calling a maintenance of effort budget. We want to maintain our current excellence while implementing a strategic plan whose impact will be factored in FY25. We're looking forward to starting that strategic plan work next month. We are going to continue our investment in curricular materials and resources, continued investment in culturally responsive teaching through continued professional development and the recruitment and retention of educators of color. We want to continue to analyze and target investment in special education services. We want to definitely continue to mitigate our disproportionality. And disproportionality, for those that don't know, means that certain bodies of students are overrepresented in certain areas. And we see that in special education, where our children of color are disproportionately represented there or referred, and continue to support the social, emotional, and academic needs of our students. We certainly want to make sure we maintain our commitment to innovative instructional practices, as well as program reviews that I talked about earlier. Maximizing operational and financial efficiencies. I'm committed to making sure that we provide the absolute best services possible in the most cost-effective ways. And this $131.8 million budget does not include new initiatives. And I will talk about that here. So when we take a look at what we've done is mocked up FY24, 25, and 26. We've looked at the town allocations of what we believe is projected forth as our town allocation, what the PSB projected budgets would be, simply taking what we currently have and rolling forward. And then that presents us with initial gaps for each of those fiscal years. So if we take FY24 as an example and walk through it, our revised town allocation is 127 million. My initial budget request is 131.8 million. That results in an initial gap of $4.8 million. What we've committed to do on the school side is what we're calling programmatic adjustments, and we won't get any more specific than that at this time because the committee certainly has to weigh in on identifying and supporting those adjustments, but we're committed to making programmatic reductions essentially to this budget to come down with a new gap or subsequent gap of $3 million. And then if we look at how might we enhance or start building up, reinvesting in our programs, for our BEAP full day, it's important to note that we're very committed to getting out of the lease spaces, and we've done quite a bit of work on that and are continuing to look for opportunities to pull our existing satellite BEAP locations back into our home buildings, our arcade schools. So when we're looking at BEAP, the reason you see these numbers projected forward is we're looking to take BEAP and make it a full day program on the on the revolver side. So right now, part of BEEP or our specialized services portion is full day, but we want to offer that across the board for our BEEP students. We believe that in FY25, we will be able to factor in a cost structure that will allow BEEP to essentially pay for itself and build up enough reserve so that that carries us into FY26. So that's the thinking there, that all of our BEEP programs starting in FY25 will be full day. For athletic support, our athletic director, Kyle Williams, came to us and shared the need for a program review of athletics to look for efficiencies there. Brookline High School is certainly recognized across Massachusetts as one of the finest in the state. And with that, we also have one of the finest athletic set of offerings in the state as well. And we're looking at that structure with one athletic director and one assistant, and having a platform of some of the highest number of sports offerings of many Massachusetts high schools. So we need to provide additional supports to athletics. For student services support, we did a review my first year of special education, and the review came back and identified that we were understaffed with our program directors. So the recommendation from that review was to add back a K-8 director for special education. This also includes a full-time nurse. We have a nurse right now that's a traveling nurse, the equivalent of 1.0 FTE, but 3 people are serving in that role currently. And so this request also includes an additional nurse. The South Brookline basically is a no-fee bus for the students, high school students in South Brookline, to get them to the high school. So that's running shuttle service for those students in the mornings and afternoon. We're projecting that cost to be $200,000. And then we're looking at our world language program, intentionally here at the elementary or the K-8 section, for alignment, program redesign and alignment with high school. So we're wanting to look at world language to say, is this program meeting the promise that it was designed to back when that override brought it in? And if it is, great. But if it's not, we want to make sure that we shore up that program or develop a program that meets the promises and needs that were identified. So our subtotal for our new initiatives here in FY24 come to $690,000. If you take this $690,000, add it to the subsequent gap identified by removing $1.85 million, we have what we're calling our new override request at $3.69 million for year one, which would bring our new projected budget to $130,704,685. And the same process is for each year. Only big difference here is in year two, athletics requested additional resources, and that's reflected in a year two ask here for additional program and services. So that's why you see a significant jump between athletics and FY24 and 25. So without override funding, a $3 million operating gap would have significant changes to staffing. For example, at an average salary, which I think is a master step 5 at $78,000, that's equivalent to 39 FTE out of the 829 Unit A teachers, which is roughly would be a 5% of our teacher workforce. This would then generate increased class sizes and caseloads for those that have caseloads. We would be talking about program removal and significant reductions in addition to the 1.85 in reductions that are already identified. And it certainly would have student support implications. So many of the things that we've talked about in terms of social emotional support and mental health needs. With an override or with the override funding, PSB would remain one of the best school districts in the Commonwealth. We will continue to serve all students at high levels with outstanding academic programs and robust student service and support programs. And we would continue to be able to maintain and attract a highly skilled workforce. And with that, Mr. Green, I will give the mic back to you. Thank you all for your
Thank
time
you.
and attention.
Very helpful. I wanted to have your presentation right after the town's presentation, so we wouldn't be rushed at the end and sort shrift you with our questions and contributions. So I see that Dennis Doughty, Alok Samani, and Caroline Thal have already indicated they have questions. So what, unless so let's let them ask their questions. I see Miriam has her hand up. Do you mind, Miriam, if we let the advisory committee? Okay. Okay, Dennis, you had a question about logistics and process.
Yeah, sure. I don't want to jump ahead of Carolyn and Alok, who I think were on the list first, but the town administrator referred to the timetable around the budget process and referred to the fact that we're starting to schedule budget hearings. And the question, the fundamental meat of my question is, what materials can we expect to have when for our budget hearings? And one specific question that comes up is you know, whether or not they're going to be called this or not. You know, presumably we will be considering two budgets for most departments. You know, the non, you know, the base budget and a budget that's takes into account the effect of the override, or the proposed override. And in order for us to really do an effective job of doing our budget, our departmental budget reviews, we need to have one or both of those available in some form. So I was wondering if Chaz could weigh in a little bit more about what you see as the actual timetable and what materials will be available when.
We're going to try and get materials out as fast as we can on a rolling basis. Obviously, you know, the issue here is that the state aid does make up a significant portion of how we try and determine this. So what we can give you, or you know, when we can give you as good an initial estimate as we can prior to state aid being released, we will get that information out to you. And Melissa, Charlie, and I will work with you, Dennis, and your team to make sure that we can that you have advance notice of what that schedule is shaping up to look like, so that you have meaningful, you know, the advisory committee has a meaningful runway to be able to receive and review those materials prior to scheduling a hearing. But I don't want to give you the exact, I can't give you the exact timeline now. What I'm saying is it's going to be a compressed schedule, probably, you know, in the last week of February for things that we can do. And then starting in March, obviously, with the governor's budget finally does come out, proceeding along a more expedited track then through March.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm getting messages regarding the other people's questions, and I apologize, I can't really see who's seeking questions easily, but I'm told that
I think Jocelyn is next, Bernard,
Yeah.
and then Carolyn after that.
okay,
Alok, you asked your question, correct?
No, he didn't.
he hasn't asked it yet. But why don't we go to Jocelyn, and then if you don't mind, I'd like to go to Miriam, so the select board has some opportunities, and then go to the others on the list.
Thank you, Chair Green, and thank you, Mr. Carey and Dr. Guillory for that presentation. I guess, so I have several questions, so I'm just going to start with the three that I wrote down first. And these all relate to the town side. So, Mr. Carey, the mid-manager market analysis, you know, for years, this was at the top, or it was near the top of the town administrator's list to get done. And so I'm frankly surprised and pleased that it appears to have been done so quickly. But can you tell us who conducted that analysis, and whether it's available to any of us to take a look at?
Sure. So that analysis is still in progress, but we are confident enough in our initial analysis of it to give you that top line number of 500,000. So that's where it is. The longer answer to where it comes from, we engaged the Collins Center to do that analysis for us. And while we were grateful for their efforts and thought it was a good first step, we also thought that the kind of basket of communities they considered was not sufficient. We thought that there were or not bad comparators, but just comparators we wouldn't have chosen. And also there were communities that we knew about that we thought were better comparators in some areas that were not included, just by virtue of the limited scope of their engagement. So we took their data and we appreciated the effort, and we used it as a data gathering process. And then Charlie and Ann Braga together, the HR director, have really taken this to the next level. They spent the last several months developing a custom basket of comparable communities for us to use in analyzing those positions, and doing the really in-depth work of figuring out, is this really an apples to apples comparison, with communities that don't have positions that we have, communities that have similar positions, et cetera. And that's taken a great deal of time. But they are at a place now where they are making that preliminary recommendation. It is my hope that in advance, in the next month, that we will be able to get you the results of that, and that it will be shared publicly. But again, I want us to be cognizant too, right, that the impacts of a salary study like that can't be viewed in isolation. We can't just say, well, I see, X number is 10% below where it is in this comparable basket of communities, so we don't want to, we want to raise that. We also have to take into account the knock-on impacts that has on other positions. And so we want to get this into a digestible format where people can draw meaningful conclusions from it rather than conclusions in isolation. But it's my hope to get that out as soon as possible. But yes, the short answer to your question is, it has been a long time coming. It's here, and it's almost ready to go out the door.
Thank you. My next question is, are any of the expenditures that you described eligible for ARPA funding?
Some of them are, yes. And if you look in the packet of materials that was sent around, you can actually see, and I'll share my screen briefly just so everyone knows what I'm talking about when we look at this. There's a big old spreadsheet that you can see here that contains all of the one-time costs and recurring costs that we're thinking about. Now, my presentation tonight focused on our costs that we believe will require an override. But if you look over here, you can see some of these are things that, for one-time expenditures, we're spending ARPA on. For example, for the Rodent Control Action Plan, we've asked for $150,000 in ARPA funds in round 2. We do believe that there will be a very limited ARPA round 3 with but we're talking about, maybe a couple $100,000 there. And in other areas, you can see what we focused on in our ARPA asks is that green efficiency and the green energy area. We're asking for $4 million in green initiatives, plus an additional $1 million in other initiatives.
But that's aside from the override request, right? So I guess my subsidiary question is, why aren't the top tier items in the override request being considered under the ARPA funding?
Well, ARPA is one-time funding, and while we can use it to defray some of these costs, we can't eliminate them.
The DPW truck comes to mind. I don't know.
Well, the DPW truck is actually in there, right? A DPW truck is in the override for fleet and equipment maintenance. So we have one DPW truck in ARPA round 2. In addition, we have $70,000 in ARPA round 2 for them to buy all electric hand equipment, weed whackers and so forth. But the ongoing need, DPW has, more than 15 vehicles out there that it needs to replace on an annual basis. If we were to put that all into ARPA, there'd be no money for the community. The ARPA committee asked us to limit the ask from them to less than half of the total pot, and we've done that.
Okay, my last question, I know Bernard would like to move on. This is my third question. The Rodent Control Action Plan. You discussed the expansion of the pest control contract. You know how I feel about that.
Yes.
And so I guess my question is there any data available from the so-called smart traps that would support the continued use of them?
We have some data from the smart traps that we're still analyzing. I'd be happy to get you that information, but yes, I'm happy to do that. I would also say on this, knowing your concern on this, it's not set in stone that we renew this contract, right? If it's not working and we think there's a solution, for example, contraception that works, and that's what we'll spend the money on.
Thank you.
Okay, next I'd like to call on Miriam, and bear with me if you have questions, put it in the chat box and I'll try to monitor that to the extent that I can.
Thank you,
Miriam.
Bernard. Thank you to everyone for their hard work and their presentations. And Chaz, I'm sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot again, but I want to follow up on Raul's question about paid paternal leave, because I feel like we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, or I don't know what the right analogy is. We're shooting ourselves in our foot. Take whatever analogy you want. If we're just increasing pay and we're not addressing benefits, I just think we need to look holistically at how we recruit and retain staff. So I thought we had discussed it at the summit. I think if I remember correctly, I didn't have the full support of the select board when I laid that out there, which is fine. I think Mike used, I don't remember, but so I'm just wondering if there's more thinking on that, if we could if there is a way to address that. I think Anne Braga did the numbers and it really wasn't that, it wasn't that much to be able to add that as a benefit. So I'm just hoping that's not a discussion that we're done having. So I guess
We're happy to provide you with that cost analysis. I think that's, again, this is the select board is the ultimate arbiter of what goes on the ballot, and we're responsive to you. So if that's what you want to see and to have a discussion about, we will get you that information and we can have that discussion.
I want to. I don't know how the rest of the select board feels.
It's all right. We'll get it. We'll get it to the board, and the board can decide.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
We're always open for information.
Thank you.
So next, a look.
Thank you, Bernard. Hi, and thank you again for the presentation. It's been really helpful for me to understand kind of how this is together as we start to get into the advisory committee meetings. I'm curious, and this is about the town budget. I'm curious about, this is more like of a process question, and I might need to just provide a bit of context on what I'm thinking about to ask the question. And so as I think about budget processes, one that seems to work well in the past for me is a discussion around prioritizing the items in a budget, to prioritizing them so we know what absolutely should attract funding. And then as we go down the list, we know that there are some items that might be lower priority. They're not unimportant, obviously, but there might be lower priority on the list. That then the discussion revolves around whether there's any money left to fund those items. And so I guess I'm wondering how these items that you've presented ended up on this list. Are these simply by accounting terms, the last items that were added to a budget, or they're there because they were funded through one-time funding and we knew eventually they'd have to come onto the budget? Or was there a discussion about budget priorities and these were simply those items with the lowest priority in our budget? Not to say they're unimportant, just that they were less likely to attract funding if we did not have the funds. So I'm just curious how you guys thought about it and how these items ended up on the list.
Thank you. I mean, I think the answer to your question is yes, right? I think it's all of the above in that regard, because the message that we heard from the select board in September was, one of the key priorities that ran through was transportation and complete streets. And that's why and to have that sort of transformative impact on the streets requires an outlay that in the past we simply have not been able to make, right? That $2.2 million outlay is just, it's not something that we can rely on the free cash waterfall to provide on a regular basis. And, given that, historically, right, what's happened is we funded streets as best we can. But we have continued to say, and the community has continued to respond saying, it's not enough, it's not enough. But to make that investment, historically we're looking at too many other things that we couldn't cut. So that's why, for example, streets are the priority there. Identified, the problem was well known in terms of whether or not we'd be able to fund them. And that's where the solution is here. For some of the other things, right, it is about, for example, the HCA funded positions. That's the roll off from one-time funds or expiring funds that we want to cover in this. But we wanted to, we took the select board's priorities from the conversations in September and December. We continue to analyze those through community conversations, not just through the working group, but I've had many now community meetings with a variety of different people regarding priorities and what it is that they're looking for. And as well as with staff, we say in an ideal world, what is it that we could do if we had additional funding that the community really wants? And that was kind of the touchstone for this. The budget restoration number, unfortunately, that's it's something I've talked about before, right? We've been in this pandemic crouch now for so long because of the crunch of the budget due to the pandemic, that we haven't really thought about those strategic priorities. We've been focused on survival. We've been calling it a maintenance budget for 3 years. And now is the opportunity for us to think not just about maintenance, but about evaluating and reprioritizing what it is that we do, with the understanding, right, that the primary driver, just look at the schools, is wages and salaries. More than 80% of our budget is wages and salaries. And so that when you look at what's left over discretionarily, it's not much. But within that space, there is room to focus on these priorities. And that's what we did. I hope that answers your question.
Good. Carolyn Thal, I think, is next.
Thanks. And forgive me, because I don't think I got the slides, so I'll do my best to refer to slides. First, I have a sort of nitty gritty question, and if we don't want to go there at this point, that's fine. But going back, I think to one of Chaz's first slides where you basically summarized 3 years out, that this combined override ask would result in a 4.3% increase in property taxes. And of course, this will be talked about to death between now and May 2nd, and all of the different ways that we can talk about that. I don't know, maybe you could either, or someone could either explain exactly what the 4.3 sort of is built on, but also, I guess I want to understand whether or not that number includes other debt that we anticipate coming on.
No, that at least the answer to your second question is no. It does not include
Okay.
Pierce, and it does not include the other two possibilities, the other two standalone.
Sorry, I actually meant debt that we already know is scheduled.
Yes,
like
that
the
is
debt
included.
that we're carrying. So, okay.
Yeah.
So on top of what we already anticipated, absent this override,
Right.
an additional 4.3%.
Correct.
Okay. And then I have a couple questions, I think, if it's okay for Dr. Guillory, or at least one. And again, I don't have the slides, but I think also this would have been off of sort of the main slide where the 3 years were shown, or where you were talking about this year's budget. And I guess I wanted to understand better the parts where you show gaining back $1 million from the BEEP revolving fund. I think that was like a infusion into the BEEP revolving fund that was unusual, sort of COVID based. And then also the 600,000 in personnel. I guess that's people you anticipate leaving and not being replaced. And so I guess I wonder sort of what that looks like. I mean, those are sort of meaningful. Like, it's great that you save $600,000 because people are leaving, but if they're not being replaced, who not specifically who are they, but what are those positions and what are the impacts? I hope that question makes sense.
Great clarifying question. So the first one I'll take is BEEP. That $1 million offset was recognizing surplus that we had in the BEEP revolver that we could use to offset FY24. So that's a one-time cost that's being incurred or a defraying of FY24. The 600,000 that you're referencing is, we call that a vacancy, we call that retirement or resignations savings. So essentially, if someone is retiring, they're typically retiring out of the maximum, at the maximum scale or the higher scale. And typically a newer employee is coming in at a lower cost. And so the aggregate of that, we believe or projecting would result in $600 in savings.
Thank you.
Okay, next, I'd like to, if you don't mind, get a person from the select board, Mike Salmon, and then next, Linda Olson-Pelkey.
Thanks, Bernard. So is the presentation of the school budget triggered something. Dr. Yoder, you had $78,000 up there as the salary for a teacher, and my question is really for Chaz as well as for you, I suppose. When we're looking at salaries, compensation for people, the other element of compensation, of course, is benefits. And to the extent that, we possibly can, if we can estimate the benefit cost of someone as well as the salary cost, that makes it much clearer as to what we're really asking, what we're trying to either protect in the base budget or add in the override budgets. So that's not really a question; it's just a request that you.
On our end, we are
plug that
factoring that in. We want to make sure that we're factoring benefits in, because salary in isolation doesn't tell the whole story, and benefits are a major cost driver on our end.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll make sure we take that note. We were looking at I think we pulled out a teacher at Master Step 5 just to get a quick and dirty. So we'll make sure we bundle it.
Okay, thank you.
Next, Linda Pelkey.
Thank you, Chair Green. Yeah, I have two areas of questions. One is some clarification and further comments on the planning department budget. So in the first part of the budget restoration section of your presentation, we were trying to restore some funding, I think, for additional positions, if I'm not mistaken, in the planning department. But you seemed to intimate it's possible that those funds might be in jeopardy if we do not get the level of funding from the state that we have anticipated. Is that correct?
No, sorry. It's our hope, right, that here's let me try and reframe this. If there were no override and the state levels are as currently projected, and we had to come up with the level of cuts that we currently have, we would likely see a reduction in capacity in the planning department in the form of consulting budget, not staff budget. So we would lose, likely lose some of the money that planning sets aside to hire consultants to conduct independent studies.
Okay, and then in the override, there was the anticipation of, I believe you said, 150,000 to be dedicated to the comp plan process, but the estimate that the committee that I'm chairing came up with for that cost was 250,000. So, and I also noticed at the budget summit that you guys had at the golf course that was the figure given. So I guess I'm just asking why and expressing concern about the reduction in funding for the planning effort.
My understanding that's the 250,000 might be is that over the course of the 3 years?
No.
It's just for year one?
Yes.
All right, I'll confirm with the planning department on that. Obviously, again, this is a priority on our end, and we want to make sure that this gets off the ground. So if that number needs to shift somewhat to ensure that we have the capacity to take that on, if an override passes, we will make that shift.
Great. And then just briefly on the composting, I was a little unclear. So the proposal would be to put to a vote funding composting rather than having individuals buy it for themselves?
So there are two potential options that we could put on the ballot. One is, right, you could do what is currently done in municipalities like Cambridge and is being rolled out in Boston, which is composting is just a part of your trash pickup. You get a bin, you get a little bin, you put it in the trash, you put it out every week, and it gets collected. The cost of that all in would be around $2.25 million.
Okay.
In recurring funds. Or we could charge a fee and say, if you want to pay, say, $75 a year on top of what you currently pay, you could join the composting program. And at that point, we could recognize some savings there, but also recognize that because it would be an opt-in rather than opt-out program, there would be reduced uptake.
Okay, would this be available to all residents or only those on town service?
It would be our hope to make it available to all residents. I think ultimately, right, the process would be independent of whether or not you're on town waste service, but we would need to, we would need to work on that. I'll double check with DPW team.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next Susan Granoff, but if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a question of Dr. Guillory just to clarify something in my mind. The gap that you mentioned in your presentation of $3 million. It sounded like you said that was the amount that the schools are asking to be included in the override. Am I missing something, or is the amount more?
So are you talking about the slide that had the 3 fiscal years broken out?
Yes. Yeah.
So in year 1, the ask is 3.7 million. Year 2, it's 5.45. And year 3, that gap goes up to roughly 6.9.
Okay, and the override amount would be those amounts in each year.
Yeah, Chaz, am I saying that correctly?
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks. Next, Susan Granoff.
Yes, thank you so much for these very informative presentations. My question concerns the funding of the long-term portion of the Rodent Control Action Plan. Does the base budget cover all of these expenses, or does the override have to be passed in order for them or a portion of them to be covered?
We would need the override to cover a portion of them.
Okay, if the override doesn't get passed, what portion of those are actually covered in the base budget?
In the base budget, we have one-time expenses available for the purchase of a number of new big bellies. Those will be coming in through ARPA. Also, the solid waste fee will mean that we have the DPW position will be covered regardless. It will be the health inspection position, and it would be the contract services that we would lose.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, next, Elisa Jonas.
Let's see. I don't think, do you want me, is my video not worth looking at? Should I turn it off? I can't see it, I'm in the car.
Because it doesn't look like it's very clear.
Okay, yep, okay. Let's see, one question I had about the salary comparisons by municipality. So we've got the middle manager review done or partly done. Are we also looking at people in the field, patrol officers, teachers, DPW workers, library staff?
Not union workers.
Where are we on that?
Yeah, union workers are subject to the collective bargaining process, and that's different. Those workers are on contracts. We collectively bargain those contracts, and that's the process that goes on a regular basis. That doesn't often go on beyond pure cost of living adjustments with management, with middle management or technical staff. With that, I would say technical staff. Non-union technical staff include people who you would think of as field workers. I think I go back to social workers, which is a big one.
Wait, I don't understand. Why wouldn't we want to be comparing salaries across municipalities for those positions, whether or not they are union. I thought that was one of our big concerns, that we weren't being competitive with other towns, and do we or don't we? Is that accurate or not accurate?
We do that as part of the collective bargaining process, right? We haven't done that for a long time for people who are not part of the collective bargaining process. The collective bargaining process, we sit across the table from the unions on a 3-year cycle, and we make that comparison. They say, look at this, look at that. Why aren't you paying us Cambridge salaries? And we say, do you have Cambridge money? I didn't think so. We have that conversation with them.
But shouldn't there be an objective assessment so that we're not just relying on the union says X, then we say,
Oh no, we conduct
or
our
not
own, we
believe
conduct
it?
our own assessments. Yeah, absolutely. We conduct our own assessments. We bring them to the table. We say we think this is more than competitive. We also, and this reflects the realities of Brookline's budget, right? Any decision that we make with one union has a knock-on impact on the others. We strive for uniformity in outcomes when collectively bargaining. It is a collaborative process. It involves, but as you know, objective to whom? You can make numbers say a lot of things. And if there's one thing I've learned from the collective bargaining process so far, it is remarkable how many different things you can make numbers say, depending on who you believe is a good comparator.
Okay, actually, that does surprise me, because I thought we were going to do analyses of those positions as well, because at least when a lot of the departments come before the advisory committee, they're informing us that that their staffing is difficult to maintain because we are not competitive with other towns. And so I thought, and Brega had said that they would try to look at an objective assessment of salaries in those areas as well.
I think I'm sorry to repeat myself, but we do that, right? We do that in collective bargaining. That's what happens, right? Collective bargaining is a process of negotiating a contract through which we get those numbers. And it's limited by the overall amount of money in the budget and the realities of the situation on the ground. But middle managers and technical staff that are non-union are not represented by union. They don't work on union contracts. So they don't get the opportunity every 3 years to come to the table and say, hey, pay us this rate. So that's what we're doing. We're effectively doing the kind of work to analyze where those positions should be that we do on a regular basis as part of our collective bargaining process.
Okay.
Well, I'll follow up with that otherwise. Another question is the breakdown of town and school expenditures, both without the override and with the override. Where are we on that compared to prior years?
We will have, we will have a budget number, right? I think Dr. Guillory's presentation had that. Ours does not yet, but we will make sure that we have that out there, right? What the top line number is with override, without override. For us, the fiscal plan, well, the financial plan, sorry, when it's released on March 7th, on or before March 7th, we'll have the no override number as the default, with the override number as part of my budget message.
And so it would even be hard at this point to conjecture where we're going if this is too early to do. Is that right?
It's a little too early on the town side to project that top line number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we have that ballpark figure, and I think that reflects where how we're able to come up with an override number currently.
Okay. And the other question is, just one more quick question, which is in the school. Mr. Guillory, I don't know whether you have that information here, but the student teacher ratios in 2019, 2022, and what's projected for 2023?
I don't have it in this presentation, but we can get that.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. I'd like to give the select board an opportunity to ask a question. John Van Scoyac has had his hand up.
Thanks very much, Bernard. Thanks to Dr. Guillory and Chaz Carey.
I
I
asked
had
my
to go with-
questions.
Pardon me?
I heard Elisa say something. I don't know what it was. These were excellent presentations, and I have just a couple of real basic questions. Is it likely, as given these presentations, that we're going to face actually 4 override questions, and an amount for a town-based budget and a town added items budget, and a same thing for the schools?
I joked, John, that the thought here was kind of a ziggurat style plan in which you would have 4 questions, right, on budget related issues. You would have the base override, which is town school. You would have Pierce debt exclusion. You would have a standalone $1 million question about rec scholarships, and you would have either a 1.85 or a 2.25 question about composting. And again, the select board is the arbiter of what goes on the ballot. Your decision is final as to which of those go on and for what amounts.
Including the school questions.
So yes, you can set the top line number, right? The select board gets to say what the top line override number is, right?
Great. A couple more quick questions. I would love to have had the slides from
Chaz, if I can just add one clarification there.
I'm sorry, Dr.
schools.
Go ahead.
No. I just want to make sure we understood the schools is just one ask. There isn't an addition on that.
Oh, okay. Thanks. That's very clarifying. Thanks. Actually, that's. I was just going to be just asking the question. Might we have the slides from your presentation? Because I don't think they were available prior to the meeting tonight.
Absolutely.
Great. So here's the final question. And I know it's kind of a tricky one, so I apologize, but recognizing that the problem with our budgets, being hard to sustain year to year is tied very much to the fact that 80% or so is personnel. And of course, 80% personnel means the cost of contracts, since most of those personnel are unionized, and the cost of carrying them in the budget is based on the cost of the contracts. Is it possible to, just to help people understand all of this better, to come up with a number as to what contracts would have to be settled at for an override not to be required, just to sustain existing operations? That's the question.
So what I will say is, right now, our collective bargaining reserve is at our operational capacity, at our operational deficit. And effectively, those things are the same. So in a situation where our contracts were settled and we had that amount of money available to us in the collective bargaining reserve, we would not need an operating override to do budget restoration under the current environment. Unfortunately, our contracts are not settled. We have made, we have made, I would say, very reasonable efforts to settle contracts with both the police and fire unions, as well as some of the smaller AFSCME unions. I would say that unfortunately, the environment that we are in is one in which you can look at it from the national context of the rail unions agreement being rejected by several unions. The mood is restive. Union membership are rejecting contracts that their leadership bring back to them. And as a result, leadership is reluctant even to take good deals. I understand the position they're in, but it's difficult. So we have not been able to come to agreements with these unions. And for the public safety unions, that means we have proceeded to arbitration on the police side, and we're going to the arbitration on the fire side. And that means that we still don't know what those numbers will be, and they will likely take a chunk out of that money that will then leave us with a hole to fill. So I think to the question that two people have asked in the chat, which is there additional money in this for collective bargaining? I think the answer is de facto yes, because otherwise we would be scrambling to try and find that money one way or another. But if we are able to cover our operating expenses via an override, then that money that's in the collective bargaining pot is available for collective bargaining.
And on the school side, our largest contract, which is our Unit A and Unit B, which is our teachers and administrators that are in the union there, those are settled through FY26. And our cost projections that we put forward roll all of those individuals forward on step and lane. So we've accounted for those costs.
Thanks.
Okay, next is Neil Gordon.
Bernard, thank you, and thank you to everyone for this presentation. Elisa Jonas, sort of opened the door to the first half of my question, which is this perceived gap that we have in the union workforce in particular, and I apply that to both the town and school sides as to competitive wages regionally where we compete versus the wages that the town is paying. I hear, Chaz, your explanation that yes, we do that, but I've not seen where the advisory committee has received access to the data of what that gap might be. And so I think many of us would like to know that. So, what are we doing to quantify the gap, and what are we doing to close the gap? And what I'm hearing is that, well, we've got a collective bargaining reserve, but we're otherwise constrained by Prop 2.5. My question is, knowing, I guess we don't know, but you know what that gap is on the town side, and perhaps the school side has already taken it into consideration with the new contract. But knowing what that gap is on the town side, is there any money in the override to close that gap so that we can become more competitive and hire the kind of people that we want to hire?
On both the
or are we constrained, or are we constrained artificially now because we can ask the voters for, I suppose, anything the select board decides they want to ask the voters, then it's up to the voters. Are we constraining ourselves to the collective bargaining reserve plus, Prop 2.5, or are we considering putting money into the override to help us close that wage gap, the perceived wage gap, to the extent there is one?
Right, and I think perception is a big part of this too, right? And going back to the issue of benefits, and even going back further to the issue of the question of how what we value in the community in terms of benefits versus salaries versus all of those things, all of that plays a role. What I'll say on this is I want to, with collective bargaining is often a confidential process, and we need to keep the bargaining part of that relatively close to the chests of the bargainers, and that's a select board prerogative on that front. But what I will say is that in these discussions, I think we have made excellent efforts to identify areas in which we are competitive with other communities and areas in which we are not. And I also think that there are just some unfortunate realities in our environment that we are never going to really overcome as a matter, but that are just going to continue to be raised. For example, I will go back to the Cambridge analysis. Why aren't we paying Cambridge salaries? We don't have Cambridge's money, and we never will. We don't have the tax base. We don't have the commercial tax base. It's just not possible. But we are competitive with them by virtue of the fact that they're across the river. So we have to come up with ways to be competitive in a creative way. So one of the things that Brookline does, and that very few other communities still do, is we pay 83% of healthcare benefits. Most communities pay 75% or less. It's something that we've bargained for and negotiated. But now, we hear from union membership, why aren't we at 75? I say, well, we could be. That's within your power to negotiate. Those are the kinds of tough discussions that we have, which is, we do analyze comparable communities, places that we look at. We look at Newton and Arlington and other communities to try and figure out what it is. But there is competition from places that we just don't have the resources to compete with. And that makes collective bargaining a difficult process. What I'd say to the kind of the practical question is there money in here for collective bargaining? Again, I think the fact, by virtue of the fact that we are able to cover our other expenses, then the money that we have in that collective bargaining reserve can go to collective bargaining. But if you're talking about a longer term over time, can we afford beyond what Prop 2.5? Can we put into an override the sort of sustaining above and beyond constant necessary to provide cost of living increases above and beyond what Prop 2.5 gives us? I don't think that's possible. I think at best we could come up with a recurring system of overrides that could do that. And we could say as a community, that's what we want to do. But Brookline has not historically done that. We operate under an ad hoc model that kind of takes the concept of, every 3 years or so an operating override may be necessary. But we don't actually game that out and say, okay, because we want to pay competitive collectively bargained wages, every 3 years, we must ask the voters for more money to cover beyond what Prop 2.5 will give us. Sorry, that's a kind of a long answer, but I think it's important for us to have this discussion.
Yeah, that's fine. One very quick follow-on comment. I'm not sure I see pushing benefits that the union doesn't want as a community value. I think the value in collective bargaining is to value the opinion of those sitting across the table from the town. And if the union wants something, they're entitled to ask for it. If they don't want something, then let's not push it on them.
Well, I'll say for the
I don't
healthcare
think
costs,
I just don't think that's our value. That's my comment.
Well, I'll say to you, the healthcare costs have been in this way for years. And it's only
Right,
recently.
but I'm not talking about costs. I'm talking about programs if the union is not asking for and we're pushing them. I'm not sure why that's our value to push on them onto the unions in collective bargaining, something they don't want.
What if it's what the community wants? I think that's my response to that.
Okay,
Because we know better than a union, we can have this discussion offline.
Yeah. Janice Kahn.
Yes, but I see that Mike put his hand up. Mike Salmon, I wonder if he had a follow-up comment to the conversation that we've just been listening to.
I was going to say that I think that Neil must know something that we don't, or at least I don't, with regard to what the union wants or what they don't want. But I think I would leave it to Chaz to work with them.
Okay. So first of all, I want to thank everyone who's worked on these presentations. They give a level of the description is really very thought-provoking, and I'm very glad to see town municipal services getting a large boost. They have been left in the dust for a very long time. And I'd like to address an issue that Carolyn Thal raised, which is my concern too, the 4.3% increase in the tax levy. We have seen the taxes, the property taxes go up substantially. 90% or more have been due to school debt exclusions. The last override, general override, had very little for town services. So, I'd like to address the almost $12 million proposed override. About 5 million is for the town, just under 7 million for schools. And I'm wondering if we can't bring the school number down a little bit so that it's more of a 50-50, and to bring down that ask from close to 12 million to 10 million. So I noticed that the schools, so the figure was that the FTEs are 92% of the pre-pandemic FTEs, which I appreciate having that information. So the actual school enrollment, though, is down over 10%. And so this follows up with Elisa Jonas asked to learn more about the ratio, the teacher-student ratio. And I think that's part of maybe what triggered Elisa's curiosity. It certainly does for me as well. So I think we should kind of look at that. But I also wanted to ask a question. I think it's not really well understood that an override, that the money that is, or the ask for the override, where we tell the public exactly where this money is going to go. My understanding is that that is for the first year of the override only, and that this money can be then reallocated according to various municipal and school needs. And so that's the other reason that I really think that we should bring this ask down for the public, that this is really, really a lot when we don't know, we don't really have a crystal ball for the future. We're anticipating expenses going up a certain way. We're anticipating needs a certain way. And we do know that we're going to be asking for $200 million or more for the Pierce School rebuild, which was another increase in the tax levy. So in the spirit of transparency for the voters, I think it's really important to have not just the 4.3% increase in the tax levy, but the whole picture of what all these asks are going to amount to. I think that people are concerned, and I want to be successful. So that's the bottom line, that what we ask for needs to be well thought out, and it needs to be successful. So, so that's my concern, and my hope is that we can get this number down and still meet these critical municipal needs. Thanks.
Yes, if I
Thank
could
you,
offer
Dan.
one, on our current enrollment, Mrs. Khan, we're at actually right at 92% now of our pre-pandemic enrollment, just for clarification there.
Okay, thank you. I had seen that it was 77777 before, and now it's 7091. So that is over 700. It's below 700 students than it was pre-pandemic. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Carlos Rodrigo.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Dr. Guillory, and thank you, Carrie, for these presentations. I think they're very sobering. And I think I was wondering one question, one comment, which was that we were going to study how to increase the commercial tax base. But as our town gets denser, especially with the much needed housing, that idea of expanding the commercial tax base seems to sort of slowly get smaller, especially under the studies that we have been doing, for example, in the Boylston Street corridor, where most of the proposals are mostly housing rather than commercial. So I guess I have a rhetorical question, which is, how do we know when we're living beyond our means? How do we know that, I feel like today it's almost like the teenager has stolen the credit card and maxed it out and sent us the bill, and now we have to figure out how to pay for it, because it's a little bit following what Janice was talking about. The middle income residents are the ones who are going to suffer most with these tax increases. That's where they're going to just probably move or go somewhere else, and then that's going to increase the wealth gap even more than it is right now in town. So how do we not have to, how do we evaluate if we're living beyond our means before the voters tell us, yes, you are? And to add one more item to Janice's list of things that are coming down the pipeline. So we have this override of 12 million. Then we have the Pierce, which is about what, 12 million for 20 years a year. Then we have now maybe compost. Maybe we have other things. But we also have, we all know that we have Baker coming on May 3rd after the override passes or not passes. And that's going to be another few hundred million maybe. So how do we tell people, no, we can afford this and your taxes aren't going to make you move out of town? So that's my question. There's no answer necessary.
You want to take a stab at that?
You're giving me the hard one. I mean, you're right. It is a. I think that is fundamentally, and it's hard for me to give that answer because it is fundamentally a political question, right? What is the community's priorities, and what will that market bear? If the community's priority is a reevaluation of what the current spending is and what it's spent on, then perhaps this override will fail, and we will need to take a look at that. And we would I would understand if that's the will of the community, and that's the wish there. I would say in response to your question, though, we were guided because of that concern in developing this initial proposal by two key principles by the select board, which is one, right, identify other sources of funding, figure out ways to live within the property tax means to the extent possible, which ARPA is a unique opportunity for us to do, but it's only one time. And there are other things, solid waste fees and parking fees are all well and good, but those are also in effect taxes. They may not be equally felt by certain community members because, for parking fees in particular, we get money from outside the community. But they are flat fees, and they result in potential additional burdens to people regardless of income or size of property. So that's something to take into consideration too. The other thing that we take into account is where can we generate that positive return on our investment? How can we spend now, spend less later? How can we get to a point where our road maintenance budget is not just us struggling constantly to keep up while the roads get worse and worse? How can we get to a point where, to your point, Carlos, I think it is really worthwhile for us to hear that message from the community that as we build into this engagement process of planning, that a touchstone of the community's desire is that diversification of the tax base. The planning department can take that as guidance if the community provides that guidance to the planning department. So
we're running out of space, and that's one thing. I wanted to your comments, which I appreciate. I wanted to add one thing. Only 18% of the population of the residents or the voters vote in these elections. So I'm not sure how informed the community is of the whole prospect until they actually get their tax bill. And then the other thing is that sorry, my son just opened the door and I got distracted. It's difficult to sort of have the full picture. We're putting out the streets as one of the big things. We're putting out the streets, and of course, people are going to read. What's the override going to be used for? It's like, well, it's going to be fixing your streets, but not necessarily understand that could also be put in the budget somewhere else, and something else taken out of the budget and put into the override. So I think the streets, unfortunately, are being used as a hook to entice people to say, yes, we are going to fix your streets rather than do something else, because it's all a pot of money and we can move that pot of that money in and out whichever way we want. So that's just my final comment. Thank you.
I understand. Briefly on that, because my favorite comment that I make to people, especially about benefits and things, is money is fungible. So I'm pleased to see that argument used against me. But what I would say on that is, right, and I think Alok made this point too in a different way, which is this really our top priority, or is this our last best, our top unfunded priority? If not, why aren't we funding it in the main budget? And I think the reality of that is, right, there is, when you're talking about a number that big, when you're talking about $2.2 million to get to where we need to get, the question then I think becomes for us on a maintenance budget or on a kind of deteriorating budget, does the community want us to throw good money after bad just to receive slightly less bad results? Or does the community want us to, cut vital services elsewhere to get to that level? It's not, because the number is so high to get to where the community wants it to be, it's very difficult for us to do that exercise and find $2.2 million when so much of our cost driver is salary and wages. So I think the roads at least are not quite that money is fungible example. It's more of a more complex, how do we ensure that something that large gets built into the budget in the future, and an override is really the only mechanism available to the community to make that decision.
I agree. We'll find out on May 3rd, May 2nd, how
Yeah.
this all goes.
Okay, I see that Dennis Doughty is left to set up the advisory committee meeting, so we're going to be losing advisory committee members soon. There is one last question from Lee Selwyn. And after that, unless other people have questions, we can end the meeting.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, and they're actually, I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'm going to reserve most of them for the AC budget hearings. But Superintendent Guillory, I have a couple for you. You ran through some numbers and calculations of the gap, and I don't have your slide in front of me, so I'm sort of doing this from memory. I don't think you need to put it up. It's not that my memory is close enough, I think. You calculated a gap based on the 127 million, and then you grossed that up to, I think you had originally said 131, and it sounded like you cut that back a little. But those numbers are the school department base numbers and do not include any of the town side costs that are associated with the schools. And I just want to make sure that when you made your gap calculations, did you ignore the town side impacts, or did you scale up your numbers to capture them?
I don't believe so, but I would have to.
I asked you an or, so I don't know what that answer means.
Say that again.
Which did you do? Did you scale them up to include the town side, or did you ignore the town side?
Let me actually ask. I think Mariah is in the audience. Devin, can you promote her quickly? I believe so, but I just want to confirm that.
Doesn't feel like dancing.
Mariah, what are you saying?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So it's my understanding, and I think Chas or Melissa should confirm this, that the town side costs that you're referring to are already incorporated on the town side of the budget, i.e. increased maintenance and such as you're discussing.
Not entirely. So the decreased maintenance is for town buildings only on our end. We are not factoring in school costs for increased maintenance on our side of the override budget. The one area on the override budget where we are looking at increased costs potentially on the school side is on the building department reorganization. And the reason for that is we want to be able to ensure that the school side has the capacity to conduct the sort of analysis that they're looking for some of those additional asks on their end. So the line item for the building department, there are some lines within that reorganization where the lines are school, at least partially school funded, and that they may see an additional increase in impact there. But otherwise, that's, for the duration of this 3-year override period, where there are discrete projects that the schools want to take on the town side, in terms of the available capacity, with a target of staying under $5 million. The town agreed, or the town volunteered really, to take that on. And so, but in terms of maintenance costs, we are not budgeting in the school increased maintenance costs on the town side of the override.
What about
But you did,
benefits?
hold up, wait 1 second. The schools had an initial allocation for this year that was reduced by $300,000 for increased maintenance costs within the building department that are being allocated to the building department.
Yes, so at the base level, right, that $300,000 is being reallocated. That was ARPA. I believe that was, so.
It was initially ARP funded and then was
Right, and
flipped
now it's
over.
back. and
So
now-
yes,
that
so
is.
the
included.
answer to the
Correct,
question
sorry.
is there are some costs that are, I should say, on the town side.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
All right, my point simply is that from my examination of the relationship between the base budget and the fully allocated cost over an extended period of time, they tend to travel more or less in lockstep, or if anything, the gap between the fully allocated cost and the base costs is increasing. So I think by focusing only on the base cost, you're really understating the potential gap that has to be filled. My next question is you identified additional gaps for fiscal 24 and fiscal 25. And I just wanted to get clarified, are you suggesting that you will be asking for overrides to cover those gaps in 24 and 25 in those 2 years? I may have the years wrong. I guess it's 25 and 26.
No, this is one override ask that we're making. There aren't any additional override asks.
Well, you talked about, for example, I think you said that for the following, you had 130 million for the coming year, and then you had 137 million for the year after that. And I don't recall what the number was for the third year, but how are you filling those gaps?
So what I did was I talked through FY24 as a concrete example, and I said the same pattern follows for 25 and 26, and indicated that in 24, that gap is 3.7, in 25, that gap is 5.45, and in 26, that gap is 6.89.
So how do we fill those gaps without additional overrides?
The levy rises incrementally to fill that gap, right? The top, in the same way that we've traditionally done this, right? We say that the override number is 11 point something million dollars, but we only increase the levy incrementally year over year. So that you ultimately reach the full amount of the levy. For example, on the town side, although the total ask is, 4.995, in the first year, the levy would only increase by 2.4 million, the second year, 3.8 million. And only then in the third year, would you see the increase in tax levy up to
All right,
4.
that's fair. All right, my third question is, Dr. Guillory, you made a comment about an objective of bringing rented space in-house. And this has been an issue that's been floating around for a long time. The schools are currently paying very little for rented space relative to what it would cost you to capture that in town. For example, the 6 classrooms, BEEP classrooms that you rent from Temple Emeth work out to something in the range of $50,000 or $60,000 a year per classroom, which is probably comparable to just the maintenance cost of a classroom in a town-owned building. It seems to me that if you're looking to avoid increases and ameliorate increases, why would you be wanting to spend capital dollars when we basically are able to rent space as inexpensively as we are? And in addition, in particular for the South Brookline Precinct 16 folks who really want BEEP to have a facility in that neighborhood, and that would go away under your plan. I just don't understand the point of it.
So thank you for your question, because it points a need to clarify so that all are clear. So one of the steps that we are taking to bring bring students back into the space is with the end of the Clark Road lease. So that is one big change that's happening. What I didn't say that we're going to wipe out all of those spaces. What we're going to do Our BEAT principal has identified a plan that she's looking at space-wise and coming up with a strategic plan for BEAT that also looks at those spaces. But we're also thinking about what makes the most sense for families. But we recognize that we do need a space in South Brookline, and right now those spaces aren't available in Baker School. So that's more of a long-term space, but not something that will be immediately happening in I think in the next 2 to 3 years. But we are, where we can bring folks back in, we will. But that's not to say that by this date we're going to do away with all of those.
Well, I hope you're not designing space into new buildings that you could be renting at a much lower cost. I have one last question for Mr. Carey, if I may. You talked about potential use of ARPA funds to reduce some of the potential budget gap on the town side. Now, 2 weeks ago, the select board voted to allocate $277,000 of ARPA funds with the express objective of avoiding advisory committee review of that particular activity, as stated by the former chairperson. My question is, if that $277,000 of ARPA funds is now going to be essentially earmarked for the engagement of a consultant, as per the discussion of that meeting, does that then effectively mean that you have $277,000 of less ARPA money for other things, which will ultimately result in $277,000 of more town money to be spent on to meet the budget needs on the town side? In other words, if we just simply rob Peter to pay Paul through this gambit of trying to avoid advisory committee review of that particular item.
It's not 1-to-1. I mean, but I hear what you're saying. It is a one-time funding use. The initial your initial premise is correct, right? Which is that, yes, because the select board allocated ARPA funding to the town for that purpose, I reduced the town's overall ARPA ask to the committee by $277,000 in order to keep with the promise that we made to the committee of ensuring that our total ARPA ask was less than half of the amount outstanding. So with that said, would that money, is that now money that is in the recurring section of the budget? No, not necessarily. It's one-time money. Could I potentially think of other things that we might like to do with $277,000 if there were other priorities out there? Sure. I think we could come up with other planning related things, but that was a request of the planning department. It was a priority of the planning department to move this process forward. The select board agreed that it was worth spending that money on now to ensure that we comply with the deadline for the MBTA Communities Act and have something meaningful to present to town meeting in the fall. So the idea that had we not done that, we would have $277,000 in less in recurring costs, I don't necessarily think is true.
But haven't you identified ARPA money that could be used to defray some of the recurring costs for FY24? I thought that's what you said.
Yeah, I have. For example,
so why is this different?
Well, I mean, we could theoretically, right? We could theoretically spend that money towards additional big bellies, for example. We could spend that money towards defraying. I'm looking at my master sheet here, but really, what we have put the override money towards is recurring costs that are difficult to meet with one-time funds. For example, salaries. It's not, wherever possible, I've tried to avoid situations where we're using one-time we're using recurring funds for things that are really one-time expenses. For example, I think going back to the question that Jocelyn Murphy asked, right? Can't we use ARPA money for the trucks? And the answer is yes, and we are using ARPA money for the trucks. So theoretically, that $277,000, if that was a community priority, we could have spent it towards a truck, and that would be one less truck we'd have to buy. But that wouldn't necessarily mean that truck line item wouldn't be in the override because we have 13 more trucks we have to buy. And it makes sense for a community perspective to increase the capacity to buy those trucks.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we can probably end the meeting now. Advisory committee is going to their separate meeting. I'd like to thank both Chaz as well as Dr. Guillory for their presentations. Dr. Guillory, I really appreciate your slide deck. It's much better than previous slide decks I've seen from schools. And I take it you're going to make that available to us, or do we go to your website?
No, sir, I'll make it available to you all.
Okay, great. Be very helpful. Any final questions or comments from the select board? Or the advisory committee? I mean,
Is this it for us? Is this it for our meeting?
Yeah,
yep, that's the end of the agenda.
Oh, you're
I
making
just,
right
I
now.
wanted,
Pardon me?
sorry,
Thank you. That's what I was saying. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, I just want to say, Chaz, I think that listening to all of this, as much as I'd already heard a lot of it before, your clarifications were very helpful. And I hope that it helped others as well. Thank you.
I hope this is the beginning of a conversation with a lot of you, as opposed to, this is an ongoing process where the select board is going to vote on this in March. And we look forward on our side to hearing from you, on the town side to hearing from you and your priorities. So thank you all.
Yeah. And I'd also like to, I second that. I mean, I thought both your presentations were very, very helpful, and your responses to people's questions were very enlightening. I'd like to suggest that if people in the audience who are not members of the select board or the advisory committee have questions or comments, that they send them to us via email to the select board office. We do read them and they are helpful. So with that, I'd like to end this meeting. We're not adjourning it, we're ending it. Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.